Welcome back to another episode of A Mental Health Break with Vincent A. Lanci. I'm excited to launch another episode for you all. I'm Vincent Lanci, speaker, coach, and author of the book Left for Dead, A Story of Redemption. When I was 21 years old, I was the victim of a hit-and-run accident while walking home from a friend's birthday. After coming out of a coma and suffering from a traumatic brain injury, or you may know of as a TBI, I soon realized that it was time to put my mental health on a very high pedestal in my life. This transformative experience has led me to create a podcast that is all things mental health. Would it benefit you to hear from mental health professionals and influencers? Would it also add value to your life to hear mental health advocates share their authentic stories and hear them talk about their mental health, the disparities they face, and how they actively combat them? If you answered yes to any of those questions, you came to the right place. I want to start by congratulating you for making your mental health a priority. If you missed the last episode, be sure to download it after you tune in today. On this episode, I am happy to introduce my guest, Bailey Smith. I met Bailey many months ago through Instagram as she was an avid supporter of all my content. I began to look into her story and thought she would add a lot of value to this show. She has a lot to share and is a first for the show to chat about the mental health world as it relates to domestic violence, suicide, and drug prevention. She has dealt with mental health disparities as she was married to somebody with a narcissistic personality disorder and also showed sociopathic tendencies. Her son had a breakdown after she separated from the marriage, and it took a while to find help for him, so she began advocating even more so for mental health awareness. Allow me to please introduce Bailey Smith. Bailey, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Vincent, for having me.
Absolutely. Would you mind please introducing yourself to our listeners just a little more and share part of your story before we dive in? And please do share your role relating to mental health.
Okay, well, first, I am a mom to 3 boys. That's my main thing. I am a survivor of domestic violence, and my children are survivors of abuse. Whenever I have a chance to share my story and bring awareness to others, so that they can get help or see that there is help out there, I jump at the chance. So basically, my story is pretty long, so I'm going to have to shrink it to like minimal. So I got married at a very young age. My ex was 7.5 years older than I, and he was married prior for a very short time. I was in denial most of my marriage. I always said my ex had anger issues and didn't respect me. And I would always have to warn him before we had guests or families over, please behave. That was one of my lines to him. So that was like a very big, 21 years, even from the start, anger was tremendous. As I said, I was very, very young. Nobody knew about personality disorders, narcissism. Right. There's a specialty that therapists and doctors are just now starting to get certified in.
Yep.
And I would always say to him, once we had 3 boys, or once we had our oldest, I said, as he got older, I said, this kid, you're his role model. How you behave he's gonna mimic it. So there, literally, he tried to control himself. He sometimes he could, sometimes he couldn't. So, I think I really lived blindsided for 21 years. After the fact, everybody would tell me, oh, we knew. something wasn't normal. We knew he wasn't. My family would say things, but during the time, we all just tiptoed around him.
Mm.
Um, so that was, I loved this man. I was 21 and a half when I got married. I was 20 when I met him. And I gave him my heart and soul, and we shared a business together. And that was it. Fast forward to about, I don't know, maybe 6 years ago. Um, I would say, there were times he was great. There were times my mother used to call him Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because he could be amazing and then he could be a totally different person. So as my kids got older and started seeing the anger and violence, and when he got violent, he would throw things, break things, and it would be geared at all of us. Now, these boys loved him unconditionally.
Yeah.
And I believe I used to say to him, you grew up in a dysfunctional family and there was no unconditional love. You have 3 children who love you no matter how you behave. Why not behave? You show them the right way. Show them how to treat a woman. So, but when somebody's mentally ill, they can't help themselves. So after 21 years, there's so much part of the story. I could write a book, but it finally came to a point where he snapped and he tried to kill me. He beat the crap out of me.
Oh my God.
And I was very lucky that my middle son was on school vacation and he was home, and he broke down the bedroom door and literally saved my life. And yeah, and I know people tell me this is a crazy thing to say, but it was the best thing that ever happened, because I became so numb. I looked at him, I was empty, and I was able to say, I'm done. So that was really, that's when I said, I'm done. Let's separate.
I want to commend your ability to share your story to help other people battling similar situations. I know that it's definitely not easy to share your story like that, but I really am excited to hear everything you have to offer throughout this entire episode, because you're definitely going to help a lot of people, Bailey. But what I do on each episode before we get going is I introduce the mental health story of someone who is famous, because I want to let you, the listeners, know you are not alone. I want you to understand that even though someone looks like they are healthy from the outside, they may not be on the inside too. For today's episode, I will introduce the mental health related story of an actress we have all loved for decades, Halle Berry, from an article I read in Everyday Health. The article started with a powerful quote from Berry, and she said, "Domestic violence can happen to anyone, including celebrities. This is not an issue of class or economics. It's whether you value yourself enough to expect better treatment." However, despite her mass success, the article does describe how the scars that came from watching her mother's abuse at the hands of her father are still lingering. Halle went on to say, "I've struggled with self-worth problems. I've never had to run to a shelter, but I have at times chose the wrong partner, and I'd run out the door if I suspected violence was possible." Lisa Peaty, a social worker in the article who treats domestic violence survivors at Mood Treatment Center at Wake Forest University School of Medicine, had this to say: "Domestic partner abuse eventually erodes away a survivor's sense of self, making them doubt their ability to make good decisions and shattering their self-esteem. To no surprise, the scars from this abuse still linger with her mother as well, where Halle said, quote, 'She's still struggling with why she put up with the abuse and why she put her kids in that environment. But fast forward to this article's date. Barry helps support the Genesis Center, which is a Los Angeles-based domestic violence intervention program that provides shelter, support, and other services to women in abusive relationships and their children. Bailey, what did you take away from this article or Hallie's statements on mental health?
I could relate to almost everything she said.
That's why I chose the article. I thought maybe with your situation, maybe you might be able to provide
every survivor, healthy survivor, as healthy as it could be, or at least once you've gotten help, will be able to identify or see themselves in any person that's walked that walk. I also have, during my marriage and after, I attracted bad friendships with women, even. That as I was getting help, I realized those were unhealthy, toxic friendships, and I cut them off. I recently got out of a 2-year relationship that was extremely toxic. I realized that afterwards it was emotionally abusive. I knew it. I saw the flags. I saw it. That's one of the things I'm working on right now. Those are why I continue to do it. So you forever, people that have been through trauma are always going to either gravitate towards drama, towards that behavior, or, we attract it. One of the things that I have is major trust issues. I don't have, I never had at that time physical I didn't have physically self-esteem issues. I was an avid runner, and that was my besides my other workouts, that was how I handled things. So
Right.
I was very thin. I looked good. I was very happy with myself. So, but mentally, I was not healthy. So, and in any home that children will see violence, you will trigger each other when you witness certain behaviors. You're predisposed, and if you don't get help, which is in my ex-husband's case, I believe there was trauma as a child, and I believe his mother had narcissistic personality disorder, and I believe that he just never got help. And even during our marriage, he would charm the therapist. So basically, so yes, as much help as you get, the trauma, the PTSD, the triggering, those are things that, they're there. You learn to cope, you learn coping skills, and therapy, I don't ever see myself in the near future, and we're going on 5 years since my actual separation. I don't see me stopping therapy.
I think therapy is important for everybody, to be honest. I think everybody should have one. It should be one of their bucket list, a lawyer, a doctor, a therapist. And I also thought it was interesting how you said maybe with genetics, with your husband's mother. That's a very interesting topic that comes up once in a while. But thank you for providing all that value. I knew a relating article may be able to do just that. But it is time for the main event. Bailey, on each episode, my guest and I will go over this series of 6 questions, which only slightly varies depending on if the guest is speaking on their own or others' mental health. And by doing this, it allows me to deliver as much value to you all, the listeners, Many would agree the more common or talked about types of mental disparities are mood disorders, anxiety disorders, or schizophrenia disorders. What areas did you come across the most?
Well, I would add to that bipolar depression, anxiety, and now I would definitely, since it's become more and more popular, unfortunately, um, narcissism, NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, sociopathy, psychopathy. Um, Narcissism is huge. And I would say that, going back 8, 10 years, um, 10 years, whatever, even 5 years, um, psychologists, psychiatrists, psychotherapists, social workers, they didn't know about any of these things. It's a specialized training, it's a specialized certification. And I'm not a professional. This is just from my experience and my research and talking to many different professionals and learning and all that kind of stuff. Those are big,
Well, what
big.
areas did you come across? What areas did you experience when you were going through all of this?
I would experience depression. While I was married, I would go in and out of depression modes. Um, when I was separated, I went through everything: anxiety, depression, um, triggers, PTSD.
Right.
Um, uh, you go through everything. You go like this,
Which
up
was
and
the
down,
worst?
up.
Which was the worst for you, or should I say, the most difficult to deal with for you?
I would say depression is probably the hardest thing because it wasn't just me. I had 3 boys,
Yeah, let's talk
and
about that.
we were all going through depression and anxiety, and all they all have and ADD medication enhances anxiety, which is
Hmm.
also predisposed
Yes.
in the genetics on both sides of our families. So it was enhanced, and then the, when when everything started setting in, the depression started, and that's when my eldest son um, started cutting him. Well, he had cut himself before, but um, that was one of the big triggers that made me realize something is wrong with this kid.
Yeah.
Um, he was really verbally and mentally, emotionally abused a lot by my ex-husband, and because he seeked his approval so much,
Right.
I I never realized until I tried to figure out where to get this kid help.
Hmm.
And in the end, I realized that one of the biggest problems that he has is bulimia. And I sent him to the best place um, in South Florida. And that's real, because of him is how I got into advocating.
That's a great
Um,
answer, because that was going to be my next question for you. I
okay.
know that we touched on it a little bit in your preview. You gave the audience a big preview to your story. But what was that exact moment, I was going to ask, where you really decided you wanted to take a stance against the mental health stigmas? Let's talk about that moment a little more.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of different components.
Let's hear it.
So bear with me.
You're good.
So basically, my son um, had 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 taken a handful of my sleeping medication. He had broken into my room, and it had caused him to start cutting himself. So um, first, he ended up in drug rehab, which was not the place for him.
Yeah.
And then I was racking my brains, we're going through all of his diagnoses, and then I got him into this eating disorder because they deal with the root. They
Hmm.
call it the onion, and you peel the layers of the onion to the root of the problem. And they saved his life. But I'm an insurance broker,
Okay.
okay? So I know my rights with when it comes to the health. I didn't need an advocate. I was my own advocate.
Yep.
And I had an account with LinkedIn for my business.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I do employee benefits. And I just started ranting and raving about saving my son and him needing to be in treatment because they want you out right away, in and out, you know. They think you can get better. You could fix years and years of trauma in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month,
Yeah.
and you can't. So I would actually tag them on LinkedIn. I would tag anybody I can find in the company. I have to tell you, my son got 5.5 months, which is not the norm. But I threatened everything you can imagine. But how I got into advocating and drug prevention and all that kind of stuff, mental health awareness, the stigma of mental health and drug addiction and prevention, suicide prevention and domestic violence, was to really, when you see your child suffering or somebody that you love suffering and you have zero control, there's somebody or company or whoever, he's in he's in their hands.
Mm-hmm.
That person is in their hands. You fight like hell, and that's the kind of mother I am. And I fought like hell, and I made such a humongous network of people on LinkedIn. I met so many people. Tracy Maxwell, I know is going to be on your show.
Yeah, yeah.
She's a very good friend of mine, actually.
Oh, really?
Yes, she hooked me up. I was on Louise H. Reed. You know Louise? Reed. I was on a couple of podcasts because of her, but we're good friends, and you know, she was one of the people that helped me, that was supportive of me. I then came across this organization called NASCA.org, National Association for Adult Survivors of Childhood Abuse, Domestic Violence, Trauma, and one of their ambassadors reached out to me and asked me if I'd like to tell my story on their show. And I guess I'll get more into that later on, but because it'll be a question that you're going to ask me. So yeah, so I started ranting and raving on every platform of social media for my son to get the proper help, and how mental health is more important than physical health, because if you don't have mental health, you don't have physical health.
I can agree with that. You know, you need to have mental health checks just like people have regular physical checkups, and that's unfortunately not enough. But the advocacy you're doing is great. As far as what you've experienced, what advice can you give to our listeners as what may be considered a potential early sign that they may be developing some form of mental disparity?
So I would say that one of the signs of somebody that is starting to not feel okay is, well, usually it's depression.
Okay.
You don't want to get out of bed. You don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. You're anxious. You just start to, you know, withdraw from going out. You can overeat, undereat, you self-medicate. I encourage people that that start to feel any of these signs to reach out and seek help. And you know, there's so much out there right now as far as help. You don't even have to leave your house right now. There's
You gotta go
support
on
groups.
Google. You can find, you know, millions and millions. The only issue that I've been finding is there's a lot of information, but getting the correct information is still half the battle. And organizations you've already mentioned, they actually offer great information that is verified, true information, because you don't want to be reading the wrong things. But I'm very interested in what you have to offer for this one, because now we want to help individuals listening on where they recognize something may be up. If you could pick three, and I say only three because I want the three most important things our listeners can do on a daily or short-term basis to start improving their overall mental health, what works for you, Bailey?
Well, when you're in group therapy and regular therapy, which is a must,
Yeah.
you learn about self-care.
Let's talk
So,
about what you mean about self-care, because this comes up. So do
right.
people just mean, take a shower, maybe that's a part of it, a component of it, but let's hear what you have to say.
So self-care could be anything that makes you feel good. That's just for you. Whether it's, the three things that I wrote down was, well, one of them was self-care and okay. And then exercise and journaling. Those were three that I put. But self-care can be taking a walk, um, getting your hair done, your nails done, taking a drive to the beach. I mean, simple little things that you would normally not do should start becoming something that you do a
It's
lot.
very easy to get drowned in your work, and I'm very guilty of it, like we all are, but you need to make some time for you. It can't just be all work. I've worked 15 hours in a day, 16 hours a day, do 5, 6 days a week, but eventually you burn out, and then your mentality is off. Your mental mindset needs to be on point. Otherwise, everything you do physically won't. So I really enjoyed that answer. Let's hear about what else you got.
One of the things I wanted to throw in that I didn't get a chance to before is that the 70% of people in this world have been through some sort of childhood trauma. And from what my experience and from what I've learned and researched, if you don't fix the problem, it's going to go with you and go with you through your adulthood.
Yes.
I have 10 people right now that I could think of, that friends of mine, other people that have been married, divorced, and the one thing that all of us have in common is that our ex-husbands had childhood trauma and never got the proper help. So one of my messages is there is help everywhere. 211 can refer you out to places. There's NAMI, NAMI, there in a lot of states, I believe. They have a really great resource system. I mean, you go online. You can go on Facebook and join groups for anything you could think of, and they're legit. They ask you tons of questions before they allow you to join. So, fixing your problems, fixing the trauma. You have to admit it, and then you got to start fixing it, or you will never be happy, and you'll never have good, healthy relationships or
I love how you put that. It's so true. NAMI, I actually reached out to them at one point to make a difference, but in the midst of the coronavirus, it was very difficult. I was taking time to reach out to different mental health organizations, trying to get involved. And I also love the exercise, the journaling. I'm very big on both of those. The gratitude journal as well, where you wake up, write down 3 things you're grateful for, and eventually you realize a lot more things that you're grateful for that you didn't realize, because it's very easy to get caught up in the shiny object syndrome, or a lot of things that aren't truly the most important pieces of your life. But those are great short-term initiatives, Bailey. Let's delve a little deeper here. What are 2 longer-term commitments our listeners can make to create a healthier mindset?
I said this before, So I'm going to repeat it. Group therapy saved my life. Okay? There was a short period of time where my ex-husband managed to, with his manipulation and control, take my kids for I don't know, a month,
Oh, wow.
a few weeks, and that's all it took to manipulate them against me. And I was suicidal. I was at my parents' home. They were not there. They were away for a few months. And I would walk around the house, pacing, looking at my father's medications.
Mm.
And I was like, I can't do this. I can't do this. I don't have my kids. I don't have my kids. And I would make phone calls and Google looking for something. I finally found a support group for women. Actually, was a lot of support groups are part of shelters, women's shelters, or they have it in the shelters, or they are part of that organization. So I started going like 2-3 days a week. And I'll never forget, I'm just going to throw this in.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll never forget walking in there and saying, my abuser is different than all of your abusers because he wants to get better. And I went for about a year and a half. And by the time I left there, I said, no, my abuser is just like your abuser. And,
Yeah.
when you see, and this is why group therapy is so important, because, and again, I learned all this stuff after my separation.
Yeah.
21 years I lived in a little bubble, a bubble.
Sorry to hear that. Yeah.
And I defended him. I mean, I loved him. He was my soulmate. And I expected to be married to him for the rest of my life. But when you sit down and you listen to other people's stories, you're like, oh my gosh, I went through that. Oh my gosh, I went through that. And
Yeah.
that's why joining groups on social media, on Facebook or whatever, being part of groups, there's so many articles that get posted and you learn so much information. Everything I've really learned were from other people who've been through this, the people that I met on LinkedIn.
Yeah. It helps to connect with people. Relating to people, like you're saying, is a huge thing. And it's also another message to use the resources that are right in front of you. Social media, many of us are on it anyway. I think it's important to maybe just use social media for productive purposes as such. And, another great piece of advice there, therapy came up once again. If you have an issue, we're all good at some things. We're all not good at some things. We're human. We're not perfect. Seek help to people who are professionals, because at least for me, I wasn't a medical professional. I didn't have any credible input to make myself improve in any manner. So it was important, I thought, to get therapy when it was time. But Bailey, I know you're excited for this question because you're doing a lot in the mental health realm. What are some ways you plan on raising awareness for the importance of mental health in the future?
Well, going back about 3 years, since my son had that mental health breakdown. So I've continued using the social media platforms to advocate. I post all kinds of stories or memes, or I mean, I'm sure if you look on my Instagram, and that's just a personal one. My LinkedIn account is really the main one, but I could plan to continue doing what I'm doing. I'll do podcasts, share my story. I am a host on NASCA.org. It's for anybody that needs support. And they have shows every single night. I host Tuesday nights. And we have Tuesday, Thursdays open mic night, and the other 3 nights our our special guests, so if anybody wants to share their story. But um, they're a family. They're family, and they also now have Zoom groups 3 days a week where you can get on, just watch, listen. The same with the show. So that's something that I am very, very passionate about, because and on their website there's a ton of resources. So that's one of the things that I do.
It's very amazing and very, very admirable and you're also expanding everybody else's network of resources to hop on there if they're in need. What else are you working on?
Eventually, I would like to write a book, like everybody else.
Yeah.
I am Jewish, and in my community where I used to live for 10 years, um, domestic violence, nobody talked about it. And it's like that in any community, religion, tight knit, anywhere.
Yeah.
I think child abuse in the church has become more something they talk about, sexual abuse, than domestic violence. And I would like you to know, domestic violence is the #1 killer of women across the world. So this is something that we have to end the stigma, and we have to bring awareness, educate, awareness, and community. And that's where I started really. I said something has to change. If I don't use my mouth, I don't use my voice, and where else can you do it but social media? At least that's your start. And let people know they're not alone, and that there are resources and the places to get help. There are so many people, women or men, living in silence with mental health issues, mental illness, domestic violence, depression, and all these things. And it all goes hand in hand.
I love it.
Childhood trauma that is not taken care of will lead to depression, anxiety, self-medication, drugs, um, eating disorders, and on and on. And then we'll go into unhealthy relationships, unhealthy friendships, narcissism. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's like the most popular. Look, we all have narcissism in us, but to have a narcissistic personality disorder where it's taken, there's so many components to it. But if it's, what happens is usually a narcissistic personality disorder, sociopath, will make you feel crazy, and you start to feel crazy. And you are not crazy. That's what I want people to know. You are not crazy. They're crazy. And gaslighting, hoovering, trauma bonding. I mean, there's so much that goes along with this stuff, and it goes with you forever. You have all these things forever, but you get the proper help, and that's going to be what I continue to do. I feel like I went through hell, and I went through hell for a reason, and I have to start ending the stigma of domestic violence, break the silence of domestic violence.
I think you're on
Because
your way to doing that for sure.
I'm doing my best, because I have friends that call me all the time. How come I didn't know this 10 years ago? How come my therapists never knew
Yeah.
this? It's not fair. It's not fair. Why did I have to suffer all these years? It's right. I mean, it is what it is. But the only way to end it is to advocate.
I
And
think you couldn't be more right.
and like I said again, it's a vicious cycle. It all goes together.
Well, you're going to do your part in ending that vicious cycle. But Bailey, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know our listeners are going to see all the value in your episode. I really, really appreciate how you gave an honest testimonial between your perspective and also your kids. I know this is a topic that needs a lot more attention, and you definitely are doing your part. But it is time for the last word here, Bailey. And I do this on my other podcast series, What It's Really Like to Be an Entrepreneur, too, because I want our listeners to really get to know my guests. Is there something that you would like to share with everybody listening on that we did not get to touch on yet today?
So it's I know I have been very repetitive. Um, I see myself as a person that went through a horrible thing, and I feel it's my mission to help others and let others know that there's help everywhere. Nobody should have to live with domestic violence, abuse, depression, anxiety. They should never feel alone. And if you're in an abusive relationship, get out. You obviously need to have a safety plan, make sure people know what you're going through. I mean, there's a lot of danger involved, but you you do not have to live this way. And that's one of the things. And one thing that I didn't get to say, and maybe it'll hit home for a lot of people, is children that witness abuse, okay? It's been studied that their brain is that of a vet, as if they were living in a war zone.
Mm-hmm.
Because when there is domestic violence in a home, it's a war zone.
Wow.
So our boys' brains don't develop fully till they're 25 to 27. I think women are like a little earlier than that. And, you know, this is our next generation.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't make if we don't help change this world, what's going on, forget what's going on right now, but if we don't, violence is not okay. It's not the answer. And our children need to know that. Otherwise, we're starting another generation of violence, mental illness, all those problems. So that's my mission.
Well, would you please share your social media, Bailey, website, or any ways for our listeners to follow your advocacy on this issue if they feel like?
Okay, so I am private on Instagram. So if anybody wants to get to me through you, they can. I have stalkers, so I have to be careful. My Facebook is private, but they can get to me. They can join NAASCA.org, NAASCA.org. There's a public group and a private group, and they always, I do the social media, but they always accept you. So I'm on that platform also. They could reach me. Okay. They could private message me. And LinkedIn is really my biggest platform.
I'll use the LinkedIn, yep.
It's Bailey, Bailey Smith. And if you can't find me that way, it's AJM, as in Mary, employee benefits. But mostly Bailey, Bailey Smith is how people find me. I will make sure you're legit, because I've had some weirdos, try to, befriend me and stuff like that. But so, I'm LinkedIn through NAASCA.org or through yourself, through Instagram. They can reach out, and they could even private message me on Facebook if they can find me. Again, this is Bailey Smith, and they could say they heard me on your show, and I will probably verify it with you if you know them or whatever. But they can. I've had many people reach out to me just from some of the things that I post. They're appreciative. So I get a lot of good feedback, and it makes me feel like what I'm doing is the right thing.
It is the
So,
right thing. I promise you that. So everybody be sure to check out her content. And it's social media time, and we're on whichever platform you like to use. We're at A Mental Health Break on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook, and on Twitter at Podcast by Lanci. So you get updates from this show and what it's really like to be an entrepreneur. Of course, my handles are at Vincent A. Lanci on all social media and YouTube, and my website is vincentalanci.com. If you check out my books, DM me. I want to hear from you. We have Left for Dead, A Story of Redemption, and How to Transform Your Mindset When the Norm is Changed, both on Amazon now. If you enjoyed today's episode, please continue listening and rate A Mental Health Break with Vincent A. Lanci 5 stars. I work hard to find value delivering guests for you on each episode. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all on the next episode of A Mental Health Break with Vincent A. Lanci.